Hey guys, welcome to week 6. So this week we're going to talk about communication and organizational change. And there's some really interesting research in the chapter here. I also want to enhance that by talking about resistance to change, because it's a new area of research, in fact, and there's some new thinking about resistance to change. So we'll talk about that. First, I want to talk a little bit about how to think about organizational change. Today I think it's so true that it's characteristic of most organizations that they're in this environment of kind of constant and turbulent change. And there are kind of three characteristics of most organizational changes. Some changes that we experience are planned and relatively small and maybe minor, and in other cases we see kind of major turbulent change. So we can look at change from a planning standpoint. Is the change planned or unplanned? Had it come upon us suddenly, or did we already know about it? We can look at the magnitude of change. Is it sort of first order or second order, what we call, or transactional or transformational change? Are we changing the font on the contract, or are we changing our whole process for contracting? And continuity. Are we seeing more kind of continuous change, or is it more emergent? Are these changes happening kind of one and then another and then another? Kind of isolated and they start and stop, or are they more continuous and ever-changing? Today, my question at the bottom for you, for you to reflect about in your own experience, is your experience with change today more like kind of calm waters for a large ship? You're on the big cruise ship and maybe you need to turn it around or make a change, and there's maybe a little wave that comes along here or there, but for the most part, it's kind of slow, gradual turn, and every once in a while you maybe get a bit of rough waters, but you make it through. Or does it feel like you're on a raft and you're in a kind of white water where you're constantly reacting to the next obstacle in your way, needing to quickly paddle out of the way before the next one comes along? And I think in many cases, more and more organizations are seeing the latter, are seeing these kind of crazy whitewater approaches to change. And those two metaphors really reflect our assumptions about change, the kind of calm waters view that the world is stable but punctuated by moments of storms. And many models of organizational change you'll see are reflected of this kind of calm waters approach, because most organizations historically have been in that kind of environment. So a lot of our systems theory models, remember we talked about way back in week 1, a lot of the systems theory models really reflect organizations in this kind of calm, steady state. And I'll give you another metaphor here in a minute of this kind of very typical approach to organizational change. And the other view, much more of a social construction view of change, of unpredictability, whitewater. Imagine, what if you didn't know how many weeks this course would last, what assignments were required till just before they were due? What skills does it take to be successful in that kind of whitewater environment? They're certainly very different from the skills that are required in the kind of calm waters environment where we can very carefully sit down and think about and plan all of the changes that we make versus the skills it takes to be successful in a whitewater organization. And if you listen to many people talk about organizational change, they will talk about it in this kind of classic ice cube model, where you kind of take whatever you're going to change, you unfreeze it, you change it and refreeze it. And if you're going to unfreeze it, then you're going to create this kind of burning platform. You're going to tell employees that they should be dissatisfied with the way that things are. We're going to try to create some readiness for change, tell people that we're not having high enough quality, we have costs that are too high, the team needs to change its relationships. But you're basically going to teach people that things today aren't working the way that they need to be working, and introduce some level of modest anxiety, showing people that there's a current state, there's a future state that we ought to get to, and show them that they can get there, create some psychological safety to get there. And then there's some kind of organized change process where we help people begin to see another way forward, help people to see an alternative, show them and teach them what needs to happen, and maybe take some steps, intervene to help things move. Maybe we need a training course, maybe we need a workshop, maybe we need a new IT system. We're designing that alternative that then we want to launch or implement in a way that where we kind of refreeze the change, helping people integrate the change, maybe helping individuals if it's a personal change, helping people try a new way of doing something, or in a relationship or in a system, engaging with others or teaching them about how things should happen and spread the change throughout the system. So what are the advantages or disadvantages of this ice cube model of change? One of these certainly is that one advantage is that it really reflects in many cases our experience with plan change in particular, noticing something that's not working, identifying a future state, identifying the gaps to get there, and then identifying ways to make that change stick. It has been a classic model of organizational change that many people have been studying and reading about for 50, 60 years. The potential disadvantages of that, however, is that it doesn't necessarily capture this new world of continual change, where changes are coming fast and furious all the time, and the idea of refreezing can actually be harmful. If you get people to accept and stick with a change so long, what happens the next time you need to make that change? You actually have to unfreeze what was just refrozen, and to use the metaphor, and that doesn't quite create a very dynamic and flexible and agile organization. So the classic ice cube model, while it reflects, I think, some of what we read about in the chapter, certainly in terms of implementing change and ways of implementing change, it does reflect very, very traditional ways of thinking about change, and not more of that kind of conversational approach to change. So the other concept that I wanted to enhance the chapter about organizational change with is the idea of resistance. And this is a new area of research. I think we're starting to see areas of rethinking resistance, scholars kind of rethinking what we mean by resistance. Because for the most part, resistance is usually thought of as something that employees do to react to change, that us and them, that we as change agents are trying to get employees to buy in. They are resisting us. Usually we think about them as being irrational in their resistance. They don't understand. They have fear of the unknown. They're mistaken, etc. And more we're actually seeing that in many cases change agents might be contributing to the very resistance that they're trying to avoid, by misrepresenting what the change is about, by being inauthentic, maybe promising something that's going to be launched June 1st even though it's not, or actually their own ambivalence about the change comes through, and employees can read into manager behavior and notice that the manager isn't that excited about the change as well, so the manager might be resistant, and that causes resistance on the part of employees. There's a story by Jeffrey and Lori Ford, who have written a really great article about this new way of thinking differently about resistance, and they share a story of 3 different project managers who were trying to launch a change with an audience. And in 2 of the 3 cases, the audience asked a ton of questions and had a lot to ask about the change. And in the 3rd case, employees asked no questions at all. That project manager who got no questions reported being stymied by silence, that they were stonewalled in trying to implement, and have a discussion with employees. With the 2 project managers that got questions, one of them said that the employees were hostile, were interrogating them, and asking irrelevant questions, unfair questions, really trying to put every barrier in their way. The second project manager, who got a lot of questions, interpreted that as an engaging conversation with an interested group of employees. So the same behavior, asking questions, not asking questions, was interpreted in a totally different and opposite way. They were perceived as resistance. When the groups did the same thing, like ask questions, their behavior was interpreted as in opposite ways, as either resistance or engagement. It might be that resistance is not a universally interpreted phenomenon, but it might be that the actions and interpretations of us as change agents have a great part to play in what we call resistance. So it's a more nuanced view of resistance and organizational change. Some changes are not easily classified into something that employees are going to be for or against. They might like some part of the change and dislike another part of the change, so it's not easy to sort people into supporters or resistors of change. It also turns out that resistance can have quite a bit of benefits that can actually be fairly useful for an organization. A level of resistance can in fact have a kind of protective effect in an organization. If everyone just uncritically accepted every single change, then employees would be simply adopting every change message that came to them and wouldn't ever be really resisting things that might be detrimental to the organization. So what are some of the benefits of resistance? Resistance can help us clarify our purpose. If people are unclear, they ask questions, they can help us make sure that we're clear about the objective of the change we're trying to implement. Resistance actually keeps the change active in the organization's conversations. People start to talk about it. It keeps it alive when there's some level of conversational resistance, and that can actually be helpful. There are a lot of other programs and projects and initiatives and problems going on and circulating throughout an organization at any given time. And resistance, and in some ways, keeps an ongoing debate and discussion going, and people may be struggling to interpret the change, but they're not ignoring it. They're actually keeping it alive by conversing about it. Resistance can actually enhance the quality of the change. People may genuinely care and ask really good questions and point things out that a change team or leader has never thought of. And listening carefully and taking resistance seriously might actually enhance the quality of the change. Resistance can provide data about how employees feel about the change. People who ask, hey, we tried this before, what makes it different this time? Or, they might be bringing up legitimate issues that can enhance the quality of changes we've seen, but it also provides some important data about how we might roll out the change or how we might discuss it later. And resistance can actually build commitment when people have the chance to weigh in on a change, and they have the chance to help create it, help weigh in, help articulate the direction, or help to affect the change somehow. Then resistance can actually build commitment once that change comes down the line and employees see that their feedback was taken seriously. The fact that the change team listened and changed their approach can actually build commitment on behalf of employees. So I wanted to add this idea of resistance because I think it's a good counterpoint to thinking about all resistance as and all kind of stakeholder behavior as being potentially negative, and in fact it can actually help quite a bit. So I hope that adds to our knowledge of organizational change. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you online.